The sun teaches you how to live. The darkness teaches you who you are. The night the pond went completely dark, Tad stopped moving. Not from fear, not from exhaustion, from something he had never felt before in all his years of living in the light. Something that had no name in the pond's language, because the pond had never needed a word for it. The complete, total, absolute absence of everything he had used to understand himself. No reflection in the water, no familiar landmarks, no other frogs to measure himself against. No movement, no progress, no forward, because forward had disappeared along with everything else. Just Tad, alone in the dark, with nothing left but himself. And what he found there, in that darkness, in that nothing, was the most important thing he had ever found in his life. He just did not know it yet. Before the darkness, Tad had been, by every visible measure, doing well. Good jumper, respected in the pond. A frog who had built a life that looked, from the outside and often from the inside, like something worth having. Not extraordinary, but solid, real. The kind of life that feels permanent until the morning it isn't. The collapse did not announce itself. It arrived the way the worst things always arrive, through a combination of small cracks that each seemed manageable individually and catastrophic collectively. A loss here, a betrayal there. A foundation he had built on something he had believed was solid and turned out to be the opposite. And then one morning, everything that had been holding simply stopped holding. All of it, at once. And Tad fell into the kind of darkness that is not just the absence of light, but the absence of the version of yourself you had built entirely out of good conditions. The first weeks in the darkness were the worst, not because of the pain, though the pain was real and large, and had sharp, specific edges that found him at unexpected moments, but because of the silence where his identity used to be. He had always known who he was by what he was doing, by how far he was jumping, by what the pond reflected back at him, by the accumulation of small daily confirmations that he was moving, growing, becoming. In the darkness, none of that was available. The jumping had stopped, the reflections had disappeared, the daily confirmations had gone completely quiet, and without them, he genuinely did not know who he was. This is the thing nobody warns you about when everything falls apart. The loss of the life is survivable. What shakes you at the root is the discovery that you built your entire sense of self on conditions that were never guaranteed. That you knew who you were only because the world kept confirming it. And the moment the confirmation stopped, there was less underneath than you had ever imagined. That discovery, not the loss itself, is the real darkness. Something shifted around the 5th week, not dramatically, not with the sudden arrival of light or hope or any of the things that stories usually offer at the turning point. Just a small, strange thing. Tad noticed that he was still breathing, still present, still inside himself. Still, despite the complete absence of every external thing he had ever used to locate himself, undeniably, stubbornly, quietly here. And in that smallness, in that irreducible fact of simply still existing, something began. Not recovery, not yet. Something earlier than recovery. The first honest meeting with himself. Not the performing self. Not the self that jumped well and was respected and moved forward with visible purpose. The self underneath all of that. The one that had been waiting, patient and ignored, beneath years of activity and achievement and the relentless forward motion that had kept Tad too busy to ever sit still long enough to find it. The darkness had taken everything else and left only what was actually his. He learned things in those weeks that the light had never offered him. He learned that he was braver than his best days had required him to be. That the version of himself who existed when there was nothing to gain and nothing to perform for, that version was quieter than the world ever got to see, and more real than any version the world had ever asked for. He learned that the frogs who sat with him in the darkness, who did not try to fix it or rush it or explain it into something more comfortable, were a different category of frog entirely. Not better pond members, better friends. The kind that can only be identified when the lights go out. He learned that stillness was not the same as emptiness. That sitting inside a hard season without immediately trying to escape it was not weakness, but the rarest kind of discipline. The discipline of letting something teach you instead of surviving it. The sun had taught him how to perform. The darkness taught him who he was when the performance ended. The light came back eventually. It always does. Tad emerged from that season different in a way he struggled to explain to frogs who had not been through their own version of it. He looked the same, jumped the same, moved through the pond in all the familiar ways. But something had been rearranged inside him, something foundational. The deep structure of how he understood himself had been rebuilt. Not on conditions, not on confirmations, not on what the pond reflected back at him on good days. On something quieter, older, more permanent, on the knowledge, earned in the dark, impossible to borrow, that he existed completely and fully and without apology, even when everything that used to prove it had disappeared. That knowledge does not come from the light, it never has. His name was Tad, and the darkest season of his life turned out to be the one that finally, completely made him. Stay with us. The pond has more stories to tell.